Welcome to the Global WeSpace Summit, a first-of-its-kind online journey into collective consciousness and practice. For this event, over 150 trailblazing pioneers and WeSpace experts from North America and Europe have been invited to share their latest insights and reflections on this subject. Bringing our best discernment inside these conversations, the many approaches of each WeSpace lineage come to life. As we explore pathways into the collective development and transformation of our lives and culture at this time, we are delighted to have you join us on this journey.
Right, welcome to the WeSpace Summit. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Sandra Glickman, who's a senior teacher at Trillium Awakening. And let me just say a few things about her before we dive into this conversation. So Sandra is a lifelong investigator of transpersonal and integrated studies with an emphasis on consciousness and the typologies that we carry through the Enneagram, through human design system, through somatic experiencing that help us recognize patterns in our shadow and our ego process so that we can more readily release that which holds us back from being the expression of our true nature. She's been a psychotherapist for the better part of 3 decades, but she's recently retired and is now focusing primarily as a senior teacher in Trillium Awakening, where she's continuing to train and teach new students and teachers and leaders within this stream, as well as supporting upgrades of this form of teaching, embodied awakening. And she's participated in several yoga communities over the years, including working with Adida. And I'm sure 10 million things that I can say that are relevant that are not here. So I want to invite you, Sandra, to fill in any gaps that you feel are relevant. That's your bio.
Okay. Well, life is the main, trainer for me. And maybe 14 years ago, I moved from a big, compact Bay Area, California location to small town Iowa. And, 10,000 people here. It's very quiet, very safe, and full of very rich, wonderful people. So I've really enjoyed the contrast. And I think that's relevant for my life. I think that's relevant for my studies and learning.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's, was one of the questions that I wanted to kind of get to, but it'd be great to start with this notion of like, how is life, like you were saying, your greatest teacher, an expression of collective intelligence, and how do you relate to your life in a way where you honor the fact that there's a we space happening with everything? What is that practice?
It's a lot about containing one's perception and experience in not reacting and destroying what you come up against, because life is incredibly frustrating. Like, I have a very energetic body, and so I've got a lot of energy to do things, and I like to do them quickly. I like for them to go well, and I can get easily frustrated by the simplest task because it's just not unfolding according to my, need for this achievement to open up. So I mainly think that the world itself, and all its diversity, and all of the people, and all of everyone's, deep felt needs and their expression for, recognition, and their various philosophies, everything is just sort of converging right now to be incredibly impactful upon a body, my own, that's become more and more sensitive over the years. So to be here and to learn from life is learn to stay grounded, to stay open and available to be impacted, and to know when to put up boundaries or express needs in order to not be overwhelmed, I have to handle my own pace.
Mm.
So no one's doing that for me at all. I'm not in any very structured situation, like I used to be in religious organizations and a lot of schooling and, a lot of structured places, but not anymore. I don't even want to be. I like the lack of structure, but then that means I have to become the structure that I need.
Mm.
So that's my current edge and workout, really.
Mm. So in those moments when life is frustrating you, or when you're posed with the sacred task of creating your own structure,
Right.
what's your discernment process and shift to, the frustration is like the ego pushing away something that's uncomfortable, or those like, I got to create my own structure as a neurotic thought is the ego. But then there's like well, this is sacred and I'm learning from this. Life is teaching me and it's a privilege that I can create my own structure. How do you make that transition from a more egoic pushing against that collective intelligence to like a more soulful, nature-based, I'm open to emergence and anything's possible?
Well, it's created by the grace of my having trained myself over the years to be aware and to be present to my experience. And that's the training, that's the spiritual training, to be willing to be aware that you're in a field of forces that are happening, and to be willing to receive those forces, slow yourself down, let yourself be penetrated, and then, cultivate holding. Holding is one of the principles I cultivate. Okay, I'm flustered. Let me just take a breath, hold myself there for a moment, allow myself to be penetrated and for the energies to dissipate somewhat by my awareness of them. And then, this is touching into like the ground of being, or the fundamental absolute nature of my consciousness. And when I do that, it's like I don't have to say, okay, now what do I need to do now? I don't have to do a structured thing. It kind of like that clears the way for manifesting in a more intelligent, relational field of my own experience or need to express. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally. So I hear you saying that there's a holding for you is like a pausing, that automatic reactivity that's there that allows you to settle your awareness from whatever that reaction is, more to that deeper sense of being that allows creativity and skillful action to spring forth from.
Exactly.
So in the context of, this is really interesting, you brought up this term penetration. And I'm curious, like in the context of a spiritual group, what's the relationship between, like in a we space group, what's the relationship between I'm going to allow myself to be penetrated by this experience versus I'm going to have a boundary because that's what feels most aligned for me? So how do you, especially in the context of groups, navigate this? I'm open to be penetrated, and I have a strong boundary because that's not cool, whatever you're saying.
Well, you don't have to design how you're going to navigate it, but you do have to be aware of where you're contracting, where you're refusing, where you're holding yourself out and not actually available for participating. You have to be aware of that. And the awareness itself begins to change your stance, so that in a moment you might feel a kind of softening from the conscious awareness of that stance. And then, for myself, I often feel like a kind of like downpouring of softening energy, or what would I call it? A kind of like a blissful relaxation begin to take hold in my body, mind. And then I don't even have to worry about, I better get in there and be open and, allow. Because that process, that intelligence of being begins to open my own field, my own internal field of reaction.
Sure.
So I think it's not a struggle with the mind. It's not a struggle with deciding.
Mm-hmm.
It's more a willingness to notice and notice and remember the connection I actually have with all of being,
Mm-hmm.
It's a remembering, noticing and remembering.
Right. I mean, it's really beautiful what you're saying, and it also sounds like it's much more easier to do that perhaps when you have the space to just like, oh, let me just feel into this and just like relax. And I'm more kind of like, kind of being the devil's advocate in the context of like a more, I think a lot of us, if we think about WeSpace, we're like, oh, it'd be so great. We're just going to be in harmony and we're going to download the future and all these ideas. But also, WeSpaces are very messy and there's dynamics that we get in. So I'm kind of thinking like, if you and I are in a dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like really pissed off at you because of whatever inside of me, and then you get reactive, but you actually don't have space to just relax into everything that's happening because I'm still coming at you with my opinion. So how do you navigate that relational space in the we space when you're triggered, the other person's triggered, and you know that if you keep down this track, it's going to keep getting worse? How do you navigate that boundary to allow both people to sacredly pause and hold?
Well, if I'm the facilitator in that space, I know that it's my obligation to pay attention to what's happening inside and outside. Mm-hmm. And that it may be that I have the responsibility to either name it or, yield a little or invite the other person more specifically to come forward with whatever is on their mind. Or sometimes in a we space, it's even important, like a person feels that they've been recognized. If someone can give a little bit of reflection, like I might say, oh, Michael, I hear the tension in your voice and I'm getting that you're activated about something. And that reflection can, ease your way into more sharing or more confidence or even, you becoming more aware and taking more responsibility. Mm. So it's important to be able to have a sensitive, accurate, well-timed reflection sometimes for a person.
Sure, definitely. So I'm wondering, just to follow that thread, since you've had so much experience one-on-one psychotherapeutically, what's the difference that you see when you reflect something to somebody one-on-one versus reflect something to a group that everybody else in the group also witnesses that reflection and that person's response to your reflection? What's the change in those two contexts?
Well, at least in the work that I do, we have a fundamental principle that everyone in the group hears the process that's going on, but no one intervenes or interfere. We honor each person's sharing or their expression, and then everyone listens. They stay tuned into their reaction, and we continually invite people to notice what's happening in the field. So I don't know that there's any great difference because people in our groups are willing to yield the floor to let the process happen when an individual is being upfront, So they just become an audience, and most of the people in our group are also capable of holding the reaction the person's having, the tension of the interchange. They become capable of holding that intelligently, having confidence that it will work itself out for the moment, or maybe not. But everyone then in the group will eventually have the opportunity to share their reflection about what was activated in them. So there's that trust in the we space.
Mm.
That trust that it will not just simply be abandoned or left covered,
Right.
but that we can surface all these tensions and all these individual perspectives, and that we can tolerate them, and that we can be with them, and that we can allow our speaking to be the force that works things out.
Mm.
And it does. It's just amazing how it works things out. People with the eventual permission to speak their piece, that relieves the tension. It lets it go for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
People return back to the base of the field, which is goodwill, love, acceptance of individuality, understanding of the intensity of just being a person in a body and being in a relationship, in a group. So I guess I'm just saying that there's confidence in the organic unfolding of this encounter. And it's held not just in the facilitator, but in the group members too.
Mm-hmm. So I hear that structure of allowing each person to have their own experience is sort of like a conscious compartmentalization or a sacred restraint, where it's like, I could jump in and say all this stuff, but it's going to turn into this messy soup of reactivity. So I'm going to let them have their thing, and then I'll have my thing. And so I'm curious, is that a structure that you came to because it was really messy before? Or how did you come to that sort of space and time? Not everybody talking at once sort of a thing.
Uh-huh. Well, actually, that is a structure that we experience. In the beginning, we experienced that utter messiness.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like greenlighted and magnified and encouraged, and then people would kind of like, what's the word I want to use? They would bomb out from all the intensity,
Yeah.
this person. And it was considered, this was really good. But over time, we saw that was not as good as having the ability to hold oneself in the fire, let the fire work, but not to jump in the fire, just hold oneself in awareness in the fire.
Mm.
So it did evolve over time. That was your question, I think.
Yeah. So I've, having co-edited this book with Olin, I've seen lots of perspectives and then went back and forth with all the authors multiple times to, clarify those perspectives. And
Yeah.
there's a big range of structure versus non-structure in terms of how people frame and facilitate we practices. And I'm curious for you, if we're assuming that the listeners are here that are part of groups or they're facilitators of groups, how do you know when the messiness is of service or when it requires a new structure to mediate it or shift it in some ways, like you talked about? Well,
you cannot actually know till you enter into the messiness. It's so on the spot, it's sort of like, the only reason I would know is I'm paying attention to my internal reactions, feeling like, oh, is this dangerous? Is this going to go off the rail here? And I'm noticing how people are in their being in the group, whether they're phasing out, or becoming more livid. So I'm tracking. And whenever possible, if people in the group are strong enough at holding and staying present, it's really good to let the intensity of expression be there. Let it unfold. Let it, flame out. And then, because when that happens, we know that it eventually resolves back down, because we're not trying to put a lid on it or manage it, or shut it up or whatever. But so the facilitator must be aware of many things at once, sensing whether if a certain person is targeted, if that's too much for that person, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and protecting that person. It's not that, we just let it go on and on. If there's a sense that the group is suffering too much, or if too many things are coming on too fast and there's an utter lack of clarity, then if I were the facilitator, I would say, wait, stop. I often say this. Stop, everyone, take a deep breath and notice how you're feeling inside. And notice what's happening in the group. And, I call the group to be responsible for that too, not just the leader. So no, I wouldn't let it go on indefinitely. If I felt that it was harmful or hurting the group, I would call a halt, ask everyone to be more observant and to breathe and settle down a bit and ask them to be responsible. And that works. It just works. When everyone in the group knows that it's not the leader who's running the group, but they have a part, then it just works so much better. It's very elegant, really.
That's beautiful. So what are some of the ways, it sounds to me like there's what you were just talking about, it has a lot of kind of emergent qualities. I don't know what it's going to be like until I feel it. I don't know what the degree of suffering or intensity is going to be until I'm in my own body, and then I experiment. And so it's very messy and sort of in the moment and over time that I hear you talking about it, really having to respond.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, given all that in the momentness and all your experience, what are some of the key ways that you've found that really empowers people in groups that aren't the facilitator to take the responsibility that you're talking about?
Well, that applies to our whole work because everyone is encouraged over time to have meetings with individual one-on-one meetings with teachers, so that there's an assumption, well, if this doesn't get ironed out for you right now in this moment, if you leave here carrying things, this is an assumption. You have a teacher that you have a relationship with. You most likely have peer groups of mutuality. But students have more than one of these. They have maybe 3 or 4 opportunities for encounter. So we don't leave people hanging.
Mm-hmm.
We don't leave people suffering. But we all know. Also, we all know that this kind of mutual encounter where one person shares their truth profoundly, we know it might be hurtful to another person, but then there will come a time when the other person can share their profound, real truth. And we know that there's no quick fix in mutuality. It can take days, months, weeks, years for these things to work their way out, of the system. And there might be opportunity for other future encounters if 2 people are in a conflict. But so it's partly, the confidence comes from the training and the schooling and the learning and the dharma that we have, and the repeated opportunities for experience in this way. And, it's not just that. Once people get initiated in this way, it's so individual that they may find other people, adjunct practitioners, that are useful for their own evolution and for resolving upset. Like you mentioned, somatic work or shamanic work or astrology even. So people they know that they need to cultivate resources that they can use as well as our groups.
So it sounds like whatever is happening in the context of the we space is really supplemented and served by a personal practice. Peer groups, mentors, and all of that serves to really honor each person's experience, to be seen as valid. So in those group contexts that they've had so much honoring of their own experience, they feel empowered to share something. that what I'm hearing?
Totally, totally. That is how it works. That's kind of the magic. If you feel invited and not criticized and honored and, respected, and people listen to you and they track you carefully, this facilitates what we call templating, that you're offering a model of how to be in relationship that is healing, nurturing, evolving, and you kind of like pick that model up by osmosis too. So you template off of it and you begin to internalize in your own self-speech, how that works, because you've learned it in living action with other people. And that's how it works. So you have that resource, which is growing with every group you go to, and then you have your adjunct source resources. And there are friends and acquaintances within the group too. And that's how it begins to infuse the culture in general, because it's been internalized by this person, this person, this person, and that person passes it on in their relationship with the next. And maybe it's not one or two people getting up and giving a seminar for 500 people across the globe on the internet, but it's like steady, reliable, body by body, in the real experience of relationship, not the virtual.
Right.
So we're pretty happy with that way that it works. And it's not like, we're not impacting, thousands of people in a year. I don't know. But it's very organic. And it's very real.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like there's a lot of structures of support to enable the continual weaving of consciousness of all these people and community and stuff. And you said a term that I want to just ask a question about, which is greenlighting.
Okay.
And my understanding of greenlighting is basically a yes to whatever, and a welcoming and a more please of whatever somebody's experiencing, especially when there's shame or contraction around expressing. Yes. And I'm curious, we talked a lot about getting to a place to express our truth, and a place in the we space, especially where we feel like our voice has a space. And I'm curious on the other side of that, when somebody feels really empowered about sharing their experience and so used to being green-lighted, especially in the context of the we space, what's your role facilitator to help that person who's normally wanting to just green light to be like, hey, actually you're fire hosing the whole room and you're in your ego and you think you're in this like expression, but it's actually damaging to you and the whole group. Not ultimately damaging, but relatively to the container. So I'm just curious, the ego and green lighting, how do you navigate that in the group?
Well, see, a really important component of this is how well you know your practitioner, and their patterns after a while, and you hear where they're just repeating, and then like I might challenge them at a certain point. I have done that in a group, and I've had the person just stopped on a dime and wouldn't speak to me for 2 years. But eventually they came back and said, okay, now I get it, So I would not let a person be green-lighted to the point where they trashed the group, where they crashed, the whole ambiance of everything. Often we'll say, okay, good, I can see a lot is going on with you, and I want to invite you to talk to me after this meeting. We just handle it, but not maybe in the whole group. And also it's really important, if it's the kind of group where you're going to be meeting the next day and the next day, you can bring that subject back to the whole group. How was it for you when this person exploded? What came up for you? you know, what were you fearing and imagining, and you know, what would you want to say to this person? We'll just invite a continuance under whatever conditions we can. It might be a continuance. We might eventually, like, as if I know the practitioner really well, I might eventually say to them, you know, I really believe that this is a core issue for you, and that you would benefit by therapy. So, but we don't do that too often. We're not too directive, you know. But we don't want a person to just dominate a group.
Sure, of course. Yeah. You know, it sounds like there's I can really hear your psychotherapeutic background also as my background, which I feel like there's a lot of people that facilitate we-space groups and facilitate spiritual groups, and they're just kind of really interested in spirituality, and they don't have, you know, you can't really replace sitting clinically with people for years and understanding all the nuances. And I'm understanding more and more through my own path how important it is to have a personal connection with a teacher that actually is tracking my personal unfolding. And yet in the we-space context, oftentimes there's a very clear delineation. This is not a therapy group.
Right.
We are connecting to emergent reality, and it's not personal. And I see a lot of facilitators arrogantly assuming, based on a few data points of how somebody's showing up, that they know who that person is or where that reaction is coming from. And if they haven't done the trauma work in themselves or understood the trauma history of that person, all those assumptions are actually going to squash that person's authentic experience and not actually be the emergent space for them to unwind. Right. So I'm curious, the real question is how are you seeing the intersection between the personal and the impersonal in the context of we-space, in the context of your work?
Well, I think that's a tougher one, because you're right. You don't really have, you know, you don't have the agreement, the time to do individual work with people. You might give a reflection, or other people, as they take their turn, we allow that they could ask the person if they could reflect to them. So there's not really permission within the we space to do much individual, quote, work on the patterns. But, you know, we have leaders and teachers and mentors who meet with this person. And so we sometimes have a conference about, what are you feeling about this person? What are you feeling about this person? What would you recommend? And so even though it's like not the same at all as psychotherapy, it is possible to provoke really efficient and good transformation just by the person really seriously taking the feedback or encountering themselves and taking responsibility for looking into it, investigating. I mean, we talk a lot about that, you know, investigating your own being is fundamental to this way. And it's up to you to do it. And, you know, of course you can get help, and it's always good to go to psychotherapy because it's deeper and more consistent, and, you know, but it may not be the only thing that actually awakens someone to their nature, to their patterns. It may not be. Well, anyhow, maybe I got kind of off there.
Well, I'm wanting to follow up a little bit on that, which is, you know, Trillium Awakening has a very strong ecosystem of support and philosophy and teaching and all sorts of stuff. And I'm just wondering, for those viewers that maybe just have a one we-space practice group that they have going, what are some of your suggestions to them about how they can support themselves and outside of just going to that one group that may be really evocative with no other support system?
Right. Oh, good question. Well, you know, if I were facilitating such a group, I think I would bring in my own experience of accessing this practitioner and that one, and share how it personally supported my process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And what else? I think, you have to be just in a certain kind of way. You have to just be welcoming and normalizing of what people do contribute, while whenever you can, inviting them to look further, go deeper, find their particular people they resonate with, and find the particular method that really supports their life. But I think it has to be spoken.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the group itself, while it could be very catalyzing, it's not necessarily specific, to the person's needs.
Right.
So I guess I would take the chance to just share something in my own personal process.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps expand people's horizons and gives them permission. And I don't know how other people run their face groups.
Well, I mean, some of the themes that I'm getting here from you is really about humility and transparency as a facilitator.
Totally.
As a huge piece of empowering other people, normalizing experience,
Yes.
including them, inviting them to take care of themselves, and
Yes.
and really helping them see that you don't have all the answers and you're just here to be transparent.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, in that vein, you've been doing this for a long time, and that we're using the term senior teacher, to designate you in this context of Trillium Awakening. And I'm just wondering, what happens when you get really triggered in the context of a group? Does it happen as much anymore? Does it happen more the more sensitive you are? And how do you deal with it?
Well, great question. Fortunately, it happens less often for me. And when it does happen, I have more skills to contain my own process,
Mm-hmm.
and to share how I'm being impacted, maybe. That's the transparency part. And then to, to demonstrate that I can hang in with feeling triggered, that I can actually tolerate my own triggering and hang in with it and continue to communicate about it and continue to reveal, well, this is helping me feel better, but I still can't quite get with this. What did you mean by that? I think just demonstrating your human capacity to be persistent in relationship.
Mm.
So many people just check out, give up, do something different. But staying present is very important,
Mm-hmm.
even when it's really uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and communicating about it.
Mm-hmm. So if you heard about a practitioner who's like getting to a place where they're so triggered that they can't contain, or a facilitator that they're so triggered that they can't contain their experience, would you suggest that they stop facilitating that group because they can't be transparent about what's happening?
Well, I think that would be stopping in some way would be a responsible thing to do. Like you might say, okay, look, I'm really getting triggered. I need to cool off. I would like to request that we have a 15-minute break. That would be great. Doesn't that demonstrate responsibility and awareness? And I would do that. I would definitely do that.
That's really, I feel relaxation in my body as you say that, because it's my experience of myself facilitating we space groups and other people facilitating we space groups. Like there's that moment when the facilitator's triggered, and when they don't say anything and then move on to the next thing or use their power in that context to shift the attention somewhere else, it's so damaging to the trust. And especially if nobody's talking about it, it's like, wow, that was so damaging, but we're not talking about it. And what I hear you saying is just be human, be who you are, share about what you're sharing about. Don't try to be some idealized version of facilitator that you think people want to receive. And just be real. And in that, that's when the magic really opens for other people to do the same. Is that what you're saying?
Totally. That has been my experience. When I am really human, people really understand. They get it. They feel trust. They feel admiration that you're willing to show up that way, you know. But, you know, it's just really important to let the group know that you're triggered, because everyone knows it anyway. Like you said, they can feel the tension.
Mm-hmm.
If you say nothing, it's not good.
Right.
And, you know, when we do these circling groups that we do here, I, as a facilitator, I take a full turn along with everyone else. Because that's the leveling, that's the human,
right,
you know, sharing and joining with others in that same way. And I've never found it to be, you know, destructive or uncalled for. If I just take a turn in the same way that everyone else does. And share my perceptions about what's happening in the group and how I'm feeling. And it's a very powerful position, because I am the senior person, and at the same time, I'm not unaffected, like they're not unaffected by things.
Right.
So it's very powerful that you can carry it too far. I mean, I know people who have facilitated groups that they can go on and on about themselves for half an hour, their complaints, and that doesn't work either, you know. But to share kind of the fundamentals of where you are, maybe not the nitty-gritty details, but the fundamentals of what's going on with you, is very relieving to the group.
Right. So in that context, are you sort of implicitly asking yourself the question, as a facilitator, what degree of transparency of my experience serves the we space? Is that sort of a frame that you have?
Yes, absolutely. Totally, absolutely. And that's one of the skills I've had over the years of working with groups and individuals, is like, I'm more and more able to, as I'm about to speak, I'm more and more able to completely feel and anticipate the reaction of the other person. You know, so I'm living both sides of the relationship at the same time. I almost always can feel how this will impact support, or, you know, bring a little fire to the other person. But that information only comes to me in the moment of doing it, speaking and being with them.
So it sounds like maybe some of the things that you did more consciously, like, I'm going to only share this much and all this kind of stuff, it was more explicit, intentional. And now you're talking about almost like an unconscious competence.
Yes.
To be able to just feel the moment and trust the emergence that's coming through you.
Yes.
And even if something's off, to be able to receive that feedback and self-correct.
Yeah. And in fact, you know, we come to realize that it's not really as off as you might think. I mean, and it's not irreparable. The other person is resilient, and they can, to a certain degree, they can take your humanity, you know. That's why I say, you say what's happening, but you may not give all the details.
Right.
But yeah, it really honors other people, you know, their resilience and their chance to participate in a unique way. Yeah, but that is something that's developed over time.
Sure. So to new facilitators, be patient and stay curious, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. So we have maybe about 10 minutes or so left, and I want to switch gears a little bit. Such a big piece of Trillium Awakening is around honoring the feminine in female bodies, the feminine in male bodies, all these different things. And I'm curious, I'll just start here with this question and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
How can we bring intention and structure to groups that allow for the feminine to speak more fully, both from a female body perspective and just like the feminine, whatever that means?
Right, right.
There's some qualities to support that.
Oh, don't you think it's so needed in the world today?
I do. That's why I'm asking the question. And I'm such an advocate. We're definitely on the same team with the feminine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's one of our foundational principles that the body is equally as important as the idealization or the collective goal of attaining, deeper level states of being, that the body itself is not separate from divinity. It is one end of the pole of divinity. You could say consciousness is offset by energy or body or flow or experience. So a fundamental principle is they are not separate. And that, the world has been through a deep phase of being captured by structure, principle, the masculine, dominance of male, and dominance of theory, and, going beyond emotions, going beyond, I don't know, the body, riding on top of the body, heading for the higher levels at the expense of experience in the body and the feminine. So this is a fundamental principle. We now know that a corrective has been coming underway, a corrective for us in the way of emphasizing the feminine aspects of our own being, and making sure of including those and not just including the theoretical or the abstract. So from the point of view of our foundational principles, we have our eyes on including the body, relationship, experience, energy, and all of that. So we often just ask people, well, I hear what you're saying, I hear what you're struggling with, your thoughts on this. I wonder if you have a correlate, feeling in your body about that. We just directly ask that because the body is resonating with a conflict in the mind. And to bring them together is really to honor the feminine. Okay, that's that part of the process. But as it so happens, in our work, there probably are more women leaders than men.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be true in a lot of organizations, I don't know. But because we cultivate the balancing out and the inclusion of all sides of our character, women, it's clear that women are becoming open to cultivating their masculine side, and men in this work are open to cultivating their feminine side. So it's like these energies are coming into balance. And as they do, women are really inspired to step up and express and take leadership and take on formulating theories and things that they might not have done before. I mean, that's been my truth. I mean, it's easy to sit in a room with one other psychotherapy client and, really work it. But to get out in front of a bunch of people and present your ideas in an organized way and come up with cognitions, exercises, expressions of how to make this very functional. That's a little bit outside. That was a little bit outside of my own experience in the beginning. So we've become very sensitized to when speech is denigrating the feminine aspect of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Become very sensitized to that. And because of that, we just are watching out for and making sure to include the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's beautiful. So here you're really, connecting to the body and direct experience and what's happening in the moment in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I also feel that like the role of the masculine, not men, but the masculine to the feminine is to empower the feminine to speak her truth. And so I'm curious, just from your own experience, being a female in a female body, being an elder at this time, going through so many different generations of spiritual practice, what has been some of the things that you've gone through or that people have supported you with that have allowed you to be both in your feminine essence, but as you said, lean into some of this theorizing and structure creation that's more masculine? And as you're talking about, it feels really authentic to you, even though it's novel. So what were some of the conditions that supported that for other women that feel like, well, that's not really my way, but I feel a big call to step up as a leader? How do I cultivate these skills without kind of compartmentalizing my feminine and just jumping into the masculine?
Well, I have to give major credit to Samuel Bonder, who actually originated our theory and practice in Dharma, because it was really his own passion about supporting the feminine. And he really did, call me forth and give me permission and invite me and send me out there to do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, I like what you said, that it's not men or the male, it's the masculine principle.
Mm-hmm.
That we're all kind of like coming out of historical periods where the masculine principle was on top and honored and the feminine principle was not. So there's a clarification there that, yes, I have a feminine body. I am, filled with emotion. That is more skillful for me really than speaking theory and, scientific data. So that's true, but that doesn't mean that I am bereft of applying and learning and filling out in the masculine way. And the reverse for men. But you were asking me, where did I get the support for that? It mainly came along with this work, beginning with Waking Down in Mutuality and evolving into Trillium Awakening, and just the practice and the awareness of how needed it is. Mm-hmm. And how out of balance we are without both.
Right.
And we have some students that also participate in Integral, and they're very supportive of things like being more expressed, of the right side of the quadrants. And some of them have said to me, "Write a book. Why are you not writing a book?" And I go, I don't know if I can write a book. But so there's been support from that area too.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask one final question.
Sure.
And that is, given that your finger's been on the pulse of the feminine in the context of spirituality, I'm wondering if you can share, there's a lot of dire narratives out there, which I think are important to be with. And I'm also curious about your, not really a prophecy, but an awakened extrapolation. Like where do you see all this work with Trillium Awakening and honoring the feminine and we space, like what, from your perspective, like where do you see this as moving us as a species, as a spiritual culture, without getting too grandiose, but where do you see things moving in this way?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I've lived a rather long time now, and things have definitely changed. Things are moving, things are opening up. And it seems to me like the way that things are becoming like more negative masculine, like violent or rigid, that those are more on the fringes of our collective life than they are in the main thrust of our collective life. I think the main thrust of our collective life has become considerably more nuanced in the feminine, in valuing the feminine. And yeah, there are still areas that have been left behind that need to be included and brought forward. But I really feel like kind of like the pendulum is like moving much more toward the higher levels of integrated expression. I do feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there is a kind of burst of freedom and enthusiasm and hope that we can continue to improve and evolve and address our problems, like the earth and the populations of the earth. No, I feel very hopeful about that because I have seen a lot of change. Like I was a young college student and married woman in the 50s, and wow, it was way different from now. People were being just very, I don't know, conventional and masculine and not having a clue about it. That is not true anymore.
Mm-hmm.
People are much more aware. And I think change begins with awareness. If you can't be aware of your own attitudes and what you're standing on and standing for, there's not a hope at all that there's change coming, unless it's disastrous and traumatic and violent. You might attract it to you from that point of view. But well, anyway, that's about as much of a
could be a long conversation with a lot of details and nuances.
Yeah, right.
It just feels important to speak that into the space, into existence, because it's like, if things are going to go bad, might as well enjoy and be as present as possible to that. And if it's possible to go better, might as well talk about that and get collective consciousness around that while still being present to address the things that are an issue. But it's interesting to me as you've shared all this stuff, it's almost like at these times of great change, that sacred holding that you spoke about in the microcosm of the group. Like, oh, there's some constituents in the group that are having this thing. Instead of freaking out like most people do when they see stuff on the internet and news, it's like, well, I'm just going to like sacredly witness what's happening and trust that something's working itself out. And when there's true inspiration for me to act, I will do so. But right now I'm here to sacredly hold. There seems to be like a lot of lessons from that into our current state of affairs in the world.
Totally. And that is so important, because if you can really hold, being itself works the transformation. But if you're freaking out, then being can't do that alchemical work. But if you're just the container and holding and the vessel for holding the tensions, then, being can come and change it. Being changes it. In a way, we don't really change it, but we are available to be nurturing, holding, sensitive, tracking, loving, inviting kindness, inviting, authenticity. We can do that. We can do that. Being will bring the big changes. I don't know.
Something like that, right?
Something like that. Yeah, holding.
The formula for the elevation of consciousness there.
Yeah, we don't have to provide too much fire, because right now everyone's on fire to grow, to awaken, to prevail, to get this and get that. Fire is just everywhere right now, but the holding is the other element that's needed.
That's such a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Sandra, and I'm so happy we got this chance to speak, and hopefully it's of great benefit to those who listen. And for those of you who haven't already seen it, I'm also interviewing Sandra and two of her colleagues in Trillium Awakening in a panel that will also be available, so you can check that out. And thank you again so much for this beautiful work that you do and for this conversation. And I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Well, Michael, thank you for your clarity and your focus on the collective we space. I love it.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this collective journey. To sample more speakers from the Global WeSpace Summit, tune into www.thewespacesummit.com. Here you will find over 150 trailblazing pioneers and WeSpace experts, as well as 26 catalysts convening these conversations at the next edge of collective consciousness and culture.